Ween's latest offering is White Pepper, and has already been hailed as an instant classic by family members close to the band. Recorded at Woodstock, New York's famous Bearsville studio, it's easily the most high-fidelity Ween record to date, and would sound great if you were to play it on, say, the radio.
Our next guests are a terrific band in their own right. They're joining us tonight for the first time. This is the new CD. It's entitled White Pepper. Please welcome Ween.
Weencast, a Ween podcast with Shane and Rory.
Hey, what's up? This is Shane.
And this is Rory.
And this is Weencast. And we welcome you to a new episode. What is going on?
Yeah, hello everybody.
Yeah, what's up everybody? Just a couple of quick things before we get started. We wanted to mention that we still have a couple of the awesome Sound of Urchin digital downloads for Rejoice and Black Castle as gifted to us by Tomato. If you're interested in those, hit us up on Facebook. You can see all the information for them. And $10 gets you an amazing Urchin album, autographed liner notes by Tomato, and some other cool swag. So hit us up on Facebook and we can hook you up with that.
And if you don't know Sound of Urchin, let me tell you, is an awesome band and you should check them out.
Yeah, you'd be in for a treat.
Treat-alicious.
Also, before we get started, we wanted to talk a little bit about our Patreon real quick. So we are on Patreon.
Yeah, and we just wanted to start by saying thank you, because we already have a few patrons. That's awesome. We put out that short ad as one of our last episodes. We're really excited to start offering exclusive content on Patreon for patrons. We only ask for $1 a month because we're not, we're just trying to get a little bit of money to pay the bills. But we wanted to start making sure that we could offer something to those people. So a big thank you to the people, to our current patrons.
Yes, thank you.
We have one episode on there. If you want to just talk about it briefly, Shane, the Jimmy Wilson show that Shane went to.
Yes.
Way back in the day.
Yeah, so basically we decided to do the Jimmy Wilson group show that I had attended in 2001 as kind of a discussion for a Patreon episode because it's kind of a side project. It's not a full-on Ween show. I was lucky enough to get there and see that show as a John and Peters in New Hope, and it was sort of like half Ween show, half invitational, kind of like what they do there in New Hope now, just like playing covers and just like, hey, whatever we want to play, it's cool. It was all the members of Ween plus Chris Hartford, the Reverend B. Ill, and Andrew Weiss, if I'm not mistaken. So that is the Jimmy Wilson group.
Yeah, and we wanted to, we thought that would be a great episode for Patreon because, it's like a side gig, but it's also like a very uncommon thing. They only ever did the Jimmy Wilson show 8 times. So, it's really not something that you can, that there's really not a lot of it out there then. So it's pretty awesome that Shane was at that show and he got to talk about it. But we also had some special guest appearance, vis-a-vis a audio recording, right, Shane? And that was from who?
So Fred Moore, aka August Forming, the amazing Ween taper for years and years and years, recorded a little clip for us with him and the Reverend himself, B. Ill. So they got to throw in a couple of their memories for that episode as well. So if you sign up for the Patreon and listen to that episode, you'll get that clip included in our episode. So that was really cool of them, and we thank Fred and Bill for taking the time to help us out with that episode.
Yeah, so anyway, so that's on Patreon now. But we also want to let you know that we'll be rolling out more exclusive episodes on Patreon.
Totally.
In the coming weeks because we really want to hook that up. And then we're also going to be fleshing it out with additional content, pictures from shows, liner notes, additional notes for our various episodes. Just to kind of say thank you to everyone and give you more Ween shit to look at.
Yeah, totally.
I think more Ween is always a good thing.
Hey everybody listening to Weencast podcast. This is your old pal August Forming here, aka Fred Moore, and I want you all to tune in to my invitational radio show, WINV. It's recorded at the Invitational in New Hope, Pennsylvania. What I do is I select a invitational and I play songs from it, I narrate and tell stories. It's a lot of fun. So please sign up for my YouTube page, which is Fred Moore. And now back to Weencast Podcast.
So should we get to it?
Yeah, man.
So this episode is going to be about white pepper. It has been 20 years.
20th anniversary.
20 years of white pepper. Time flies, man.
Just 2 weeks ago.
Just right. It was released on, was it May 5th or May 2nd?
May 2nd? May 2nd, I believe.
And you know, it's cool because it kind of fits in with our episodes that we have been talking about. It was around this time last year, we talked about the 420 episode, April 20th, 2000. And white pepper was about to come out right after that.
Absolutely. And then, of course, we've covered shows of the White Pepper tour,
right,
as well.
Right. We've been talking a lot about that, era and the White Pepper shows. So it's totally awesome just to see, there was a lot of people that brought it up on Twitter, and there was a couple of new articles about the 20th anniversary of White Pepper, and it coincides right along with the episodes we've been doing anyway. So it really fits.
Yeah, no, and it really ends up giving us a nice live background, thinking about the live performances of these songs during that time period, thinking about who the band was and what they were doing at that time. We were at a lot of shows in that time period, a good number of shows. So yeah, I mean, this really fits in well for where we're at. So I thought that was an interesting coincidence. But yeah, man, 20th anniversary. So definitely timely time to chat about White Pepper. And yeah, so that's what we're going to be talking about. So Shane mentioned so we'll start out, talk a little bit about kind of the album, just like the production, the liner notes type stuff, the stats. The album was released on May 2nd, 2000. One of the things that's pretty cool that Shane will tell you about, that it was produced at a Bearsville studio in Woodstock, New York.
Well, Bearsville Studio is one of those legendary kind of studios throughout definitely the Northeast. I would say throughout the whole country. I mean, I know that there was a lot of artists, especially in, the 80s and 90s, who recorded there. Ultimately, it was really started by the band. That was sort of like Bob Dylan and his band's kind of creation, as far as my understanding. From when Dylan lived in the Woodstock area, and they recorded, all of those legendary albums, and that was sort of the studio that they started. And, it's just cool to know that it's a legendary album and it was made at a legendary studio, one of those pieces of history.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, and this will be a little bit of a recurring theme as we chat about this album. How far Ween's come, and here they are, and a couple albums earlier, they were in Nashville, famous places. It's cool. It's really neat to have, to see Ween just continue to grow, and that's just like part of it, to have that piece of history be connected to them. So that's pretty cool. A notable thing about this album is that Andrew Weiss is actually not producing. Chris Shaw produces. And so that's a really interesting change, and again, that's something that's going to end up coming up in our conversation, because White Pepper is definitely a distinct album in the Ween catalog for a lot of reasons. Some people love it for those reasons. Some people have some issues. I suppose is a kind way to say it, maybe. But yeah, it's fair to say that the person producing your album is going to have a huge impact on the album.
Totally.
So yeah, and other things, notable things about White Pepper. I really love this fact, Shane, that you kind of told me before. We kind of chatted it up a little bit before the episode. You were saying that this is the first time that all the band members are on the liner notes together.
Yeah. So when you look at the original CD and LP, it's the first time, as far as I know anyway, it's the first time that it doesn't just have Gene and Dean listed; it has the full band. So when you look at it, it says Ween is, and it has all of the 5 members listed. So that's pretty cool. And I think if I'm not mistaken, it's the only one of the studio albums where it sort of has them all broken down like that. I think even after that, for Quebec and La Cucaracha, it has all of them listed, but it's a little bit more vague. It just kind of says like all music by, and then everyone is listed. But this is the first time it has them all listed like they're, equal members, more or less. So that's pretty cool.
I think that's awesome, and that speaks to a lot of things, dude. And what I'll say to that right now is, it really, the 5-piece band kind of comes together during the Mollusk, for the Mollusk / in that era, right? Like they're assembling the pieces of it. And then when they're touring for the Mollusk, it's a 5-piece band. And we've talked before in earlier episodes about how, you can kind of see them like learning the songs and like developing as a band and really coming into their own. And we talk about that this early 2000, around 2000 time period as being sort of a pinnacle time period for their live performances and them being a band. And I think that's just so the synergy there to say, oh, this album is the one where everyone's listed on there like this is Ween and we're all together on this. I just feel like that points to like the band being like this cohesive unit during this time period. There's a lot of positive energy going on. I mean, they're touring like gangbusters. This is the last Elektra album.
Yes, that's true too.
And I think about it that way, man. It's like all that evolution. They've been evolving. Dean and Gene evolving the band Ween from them back when they first started with Elektra, right? Mm-hmm. Just them. I think Andrew Weiss helping out and other people obviously helping out, smattering here and there. But it was basically those two guys, the Dean and Gene, the main dudes, and just slowly growing, right? Until finally their last kind of, we had a record label, their last record label album, right? Is finally the 5-piece band, like as a synergistic group, like rocking and rolling, and I think that's really an important thing to keep in mind as we talk about the album.
Yeah, and one of the things that we've brought up in some of our episodes, as I had mentioned, we had saw a lot of shows in like the 99 and 2000 era, and again, I feel like I've said this so many times, but it's true. It's like the whole band is just like fully fleshed by that point, So the fact that all of them are listed on White Pepper and they all play on White Pepper, it really fits. It really fits that time period,
Yeah.
So
and I think it really
cool.
fits. I think it really fits the White Pepper sound.
Yes.
I think that collaboration. I think that full band spirit. I think I know from if people want to check out our interview of Tomato 11 and Reverend B. Ill a few episodes back. Definitely chatting with people who have worked with Diener. We know that he obviously always has a huge presence, but to have the whole 5-piece band, everyone there working together, I think it's evident in the work. I think it's not only evident in the work, I think in a great way, but also it's just emblematic of that time period, and so it all just, like you said, it just fits together really well, dude.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's pretty cool. So yeah, dude, a few things to mention before we get too far along. People should check out the C4 interview on from I guess C4 is some music radio show or something in the UK, I think. I'm probably screwing that up. But anyway, Ween has an interview and it's online. It's from that time period. So we went to see them in the Metropole, and that was what was that, Shane? June of 2000, and that was kind of the end of the White Pepper US tour.
I think it's July. Yeah.
Oh yeah, you're right, July. And anyways, they go overseas. So yeah, I mean, I imagine that was when this interview was done. But anyway, so we'll reference this interview a few times because there are some nice little nuggets coming from that. So I do want to say thank you to C4, and I want to give them their due credit because I'm not trying to be here just repeating everyone else's shit over again, but that is something that I looked at, and they had some good tidbits, so that was cool.
Yeah, and that's a little YouTube video that you can find, and I remember we were kind of doing some research and whatnot for this episode, and Rory had sent me the link to that video, and I had seen it before. It's been a few years, but I didn't remember that. It's basically like a little thing that they put together to promote White Pepper. It's something where they talk about them writing the songs of White Pepper and a few of the individual tracks. They also talk a little bit about New Hope in general. So it's really cool. Again, it's a really neat little piece from that time period.
Totally. It puts some nice pieces together, and it's always great to hear from the horse's mouth, or in this case, Dean and Gene. But yeah, and I mentioned so yeah, dude, that's kind of like the nuts and bolts there. I'll go read through. Do you want to read through the song list?
Sure, yeah. Okay, so this is the album of White Pepper. So, Exactly Where I'm At, Flutes of the Chi, Even If You Don't, Bananas and Blow, Stroker Ace, Ice Castles, Back to Basem, The Grove, Pandy Fackler, Stay Forever, Falling Out, and She's Your Baby.
Cool. And also there were singles, Even If You Don't, had Cornbread Red on the back, Stay Forever.
Awesome.
Had the Grove and Who Dat.
Yeah, awesome reference.
Yeah, so there's a few singles going on there, but yeah. So why don't we kind of just sort of go a little bit chronologically through the songs and just sort of talk a little bit about the songs themselves, and then we can kind of come back around and talk about the album as a whole. Dude, there's a lot of good songs on this album.
Oh my God. I mean, amazing. First off, right off the bat, exactly where I'm at. It wound up being a show opener for a long time there.
Yes, that's what I was going to say, dude. Totally.
Yeah.
And it fits as one because you know what's funny, dude? I'm sorry if I'm cutting you off, but I'm excited. So the mollusk, it was occurring to me, like, and not every album's like this, but obviously we talked about the mollusk and how Dancing in the Show Tonight is a great way to, great opener, right? And this is another one where they're like, in the show, like the first song like introduces the concept of playing for a crowd, right? And so it's really just a natural opener.
Totally, man.
And they performed that at David Letterman. Their only appearance at David Letterman happened just a few days after we saw him at the Metropole, I believe, right?
From New York, please wait for a hostess to seat you. It's the Late Show with David Letterman. Tonight, Don Rickles, musical group Ween, and campaign 2000.
Yes, and
so they perform that Jeaner with sunglasses on inside because that's really cool.
And what's really interesting about that is, that's a pretty big deal, especially at that time, because the Late Show with David Letterman. I'm still a huge Letterman fan. I've been.
You love him the most,
I'm a huge Letterman fan. I've been for years and years and years. But what's interesting is that they played exactly where I'm at, even if you don't, is sort of like the token single for White Pepper. So that's an interesting little tidbit. There's the CD single, and there's a video that's directed by Trey Parker and Matt Stone. We'll get to that in a little bit for even if you don't. But yet when they're on Dave, they played exactly where I'm at.
Welcome to the show. Don Rickles is here tonight. And from radio station WEEN.
What?
I'm sorry, no, Ween.
Yeah, Ween.
Ween.
I mean, and it's a great rendition and everything, and they nail it. You can check that out on YouTube also. But that's kind of it's just like one of those things where it's like, well, why would they play that if even if you don't is supposed to be the single?
Yeah.
Just an odd little thing. Not complaining, but just interesting little tidbit.
Exactly where I'm at. I always, and I don't know if this is, I'd love to get people's feedback on this, but I've always felt like, it starts out like, it's almost like confronting the past. It says, let's begin with the past in front. And it's almost like they're recognizing the baggage, and they know that they're doing White Pepper's different than the previous albums. And they're sort of casting off criticism, and it's kind of like fuck you. I always felt like, and it's also, dude, I don't know if you picked up on this, but there's some interesting consonants going on in this album with like FL sounds and P sounds. So you've got flappity flap, North Pappy Flappy, which we'll get to later because that actually is crazily related to that, song North Pappy Flappy or whatever. But anyway, I'm getting a little bit off track. But then flutes at the chi. You got this interesting sort of consonants that's running through it, and I wonder if that's intentional at all or if it was noticed by them, because I know Jeaner, I think, especially as a lyricist, has fun with the language. But something else that I noticed on this dude, and just picking up on themes, exactly where I'm at almost looks ahead to the Argus and the roaming eye, and it's just like, and so I thought that was interesting as well. just little things I picked up on exactly where I'm at.
Yes,
but Flutes of
totally.
the Chi follows up exactly where I'm at, and Flutes of the Chi is kind of like how would you describe Flutes of the Chi?
Well, I would say it's their best attempt at sort of like an Eastern vibe, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, you're right. You know what? I feel it gives me a little bit of a Beatles-esque feel.
Yeah, I agree with that as
And
well.
a little
yeah.
bit of the White Album feel, which kind of is interesting. I don't want to get too far ahead, but people have kind of picked up on this sort of connection with some a Beatles feel in White Pepper, and so I feel like you're right about the Eastern thing. But yeah, so after Flutes of the Chi, you mentioned Even If You Don't. That's one of the singles, right?
Yes.
You were saying, yeah.
I think it's technically the only quote unquote single from this record. I mean, I'm a big record and CD collector. Well, not a big, but when it comes to Ween, I'm a big record and CD collector, and that was really the only thing from my memory that was released as sort of like a promotional CD. There is a couple of 45s. Rory mentioned B-sides with Who Dat and Cornbread Red, but the only thing that was really sent out as like a promotional thing on CD was Even If You Don't. So it's really sort of the only quote unquote single or attempt at a single from this album.
Yeah, dude, and Even If You Don't's awesome too because they have a video. Matt Stone, Trey Parker of South Park fame, obviously, did the video for Ween. They're buddies, and of course, well, you may not know, but Ween, is connected back to Chef Aid, and Homo Rainbow is actually a song written for South Park. So there's definitely some history there. And so that's pretty awesome, and that's kind of a silly video. And in the C4 interview, Diener talks a little bit about Matt and Trey because they did the video for this, and that's just cool to hear him give a lot of respect to those guys.
We got Matt Stone and Trey Parker to do our video. We definitely feel they're kindred spirits. We get along with them very well.
Yeah, we definitely hit it right off with them when the first time we met them. But they're cool. They operate on a much larger level than Ween. They're extremely, they're deep into the mainstream, which is great because what they do is so subversive, It's really kind of admirable. Really sick, and I think their intentions are bad too, which is even better.
Interestingly, go ahead.
I remember going back and trying to find that video. As a matter of fact, because I don't think it was really on anything that you could like buy. I remember the Live at Stubbs had like you could download, or it had the video file was on one of the CDs of them playing like LMLIP or something, but I don't think there was anything that you could buy or you could get that included the video for Even If You Don't. So I kind of remember like downloading like a really shitty like quality version of it, or you know, streaming it back when, you know, streaming wouldn't even really work right, and just see, you know, like sort of being able to get the point of like what it's about, but it's so like blurry and whatnot. You know, now it's just one of those things it's just strikes me as funny because it's like nowadays it's like, fucking YouTube it, you know.
Everything's so easy nowadays.
Yeah, it's there in its highest quality that it's ever been, you know. It's so easy.
Yeah, dude. And so the next song in line is Bananas and Blow, and you know, this is interesting because Ween is obviously known for playing a variety of music and a lot of different styles, and White Pepper is no exception. And so you once again, you know, you've got these like kind of pop songs starting out, like Exactly Where I'm At, or Even If You Don't, little pop alt rock, you know, but you mixed in Flutes of the Cheese, little Eastern influence. You got Bananas and Blow is this like, you know, cabana, like Latin flavor, calypso, and
steel drum.
Yeah, steel drum. It's pretty cool because one thing for me about Bananas and Blow is it immediately reminds me Glenn is the shit.
Yeah.
Glenn's awesome. Glenn's awesome, and his fingerprints are all over this album, and in an amazing way. Like, I really think no one should underestimate Glenn. And so his contributions on the keys is just awesome. And so Bananas and Blow, to me, is a great example of that. And what's cool about Bananas and Blow is that it's actually, like, inspired by, like, I don't know if you would say a true story, but I guess they have had a buddy who's married to a woman from Ecuador, and she, you know, was a family with hotels, and so they were down there playing like for like a Mardi Gras celebration or something, and so that was the kind of the Bananas and Blow, like here they are in like Latin America, and it's like doing this crazy Mardi Gras in Ecuador. So it's pretty cool that just like fits right into I mean, I'm sure that the song, first off, they're rock and rollers, so I'm not going to begin to like, you know, sort of diminish or justify how crazy they may or may not have been. But the song could be overstating things, or maybe not. But nevertheless, it's like a great send up. And I've heard, you know, people describe it as, you know, it's like the Jimmy Buffett song that, like, you know, it's sort of like the Jimmy Buffett song on like acid or something.
Yeah, it's the only time they ever really tried to do like a calypso or like steel drum kind of sound, and they, you know, they nailed it. You know, no question about that.
Yeah, no, it's fun. Ween, they have one of the things that Ween's really good at is that they're able to do things like that without just sounding like copycat. You know, it still sounds like such an original, awesome song. Like that's what they're able to like be chameleons and go between genres and pull it off. At least I think so.
That's a great example of that.
Yeah, dude, and that's followed up. So Ice Castles and Panty Fackler are the next two songs, and they're also huge. Or I don't know that the next two straight in a row, but Ice Castles, I just mentioned them together because they're also two big-time Glenn songs. But yeah, so Glenn is all over the place on this album.
Absolutely. I mean, Ice Castles, again, is a big sort of keyboard track. It's the only instrumental track on the album. And, you know, this would be something that would be great. It reminds me of like a David Lynch film, or maybe like a student or like amateur film. Not that I know of any that ever used Ice Castles or anything, but, you know, it has kind of a dark, sort of slow, you know, feel to it. Very spacey, very, you know, it is very Glenn. It's, you know, it definitely has some Glenn all over it, I think.
It definitely sounds like an Ice Castle sort of song, you know? It definitely sort of sounds like someone's playing like a harp that's made of ice or something. And it's like tinkling. It also has a little bit of a gothic feel, which is really interesting. And so this would be a great time to share, one of the things that's Icecast has always been renowned for us is that we used it for the opening song for a home movie we made way back in the day called The Raker. And so just want to get that out there. Anyway, The Raker. And anyway, so we were filming at a cemetery at a church, and it was getting near sunset. And so, it was this really creepy vibe, because it was like in the cemetery. And so we had the intro be ice castles. And so it definitely has kind of a gothic feel to it. I believe I remember reading about the mollusk and how that was written at the beach house in New Jersey. I believe Ice Castles was written kind of Glenn and Diener writing that at the house at the Jersey Shore, if not mistaken, or it was right around when Mickey was bringing in Glenn into like the band.
I think that was probably one that was sort of from like that earlier time period, because when we saw them on the New Year's tour 99, they played Ice Castles or the Baroque Jam. So, I mean, it's a little bit, before some of the other like White Pepper songs would be played for the first time. So that wouldn't surprise me at all that it was sort of like I don't want to call it a mollusk leftover or anything like that, but from like an earlier sort of like time period.
And someone's got to help me out there if they can. I want to remember that Diener explains that the like pipes or something broke because they got frozen because it was getting into the off season. It was late in the off season, and then something about the water pouring out, and it was like an ice castle or something. So that's kind of where the song came from. I totally am sorry if I'm totally wrong. I think I know that. I hope I'm not just making that up.
Yeah, no, I remember that from the mollusk article from Stereo Gum. I don't know if he actually says like, oh, it was how I got the idea for Ice Castles, or that's where the title came from or anything like that, but it would make total sense because he definitely tells that story about how, the beach house flooded and everything was frozen. Everything was like ice and all the stuff on the floor was ruined and everything. So it would totally fit that sort of scenario.
So that's cool. And then after Ice Castles, you got Back to Basim and The Grove, which are two kind of like, I don't know, man, I kind of feel like they're a little bit more like throwback to Ween. Like Ween's throwing back to themselves a little bit. Like a lot of this album feels kind of new and different to what they've done in the past. But I feel like those two songs a little bit make me feel a little bit like the Mollusk or even earlier maybe.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I mean, it's almost like those would be the songs that you would have found maybe on like the Pod. You know what I mean? Like a very like dark and slow, kind of feel. Maybe not produced as well, but the same sort of like theme. The same sort of feel for sure. So that's a good point.
And they're also two pretty big live rockers.
Yes.
So, definitely, like, there are two songs. Like that's something that with this album that I was thinking about, Shane, is that there's not a lot of big, like, there's a lot of good songs on this album, but the way they're presented live, they're not a lot of big, like, moments. Like, a lot of these songs are just kind of played the way they're played live.
Yes.
Not to mean that they don't, like, rock out, like, a little solo. Diener doesn't do, like, a solo in the middle or whatever. But, like,
yes,
most of them don't really jam out or don't really, like, go hardcore.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of an interesting thing. Back to Basim and The Grove are the two that maybe get a little more hardcore when it's live, I would say.
They have a little bit more of, like...
Penny Fackler's definitely jammed out live.
Yes. Back to Basim and The Grove are sort of, like... the ones that you would pick out of this album as sort of like being like that epic, big feel.
Just like the dancer who has lost her leg. She laughs and all, but then she's crying. And the snow so light is bleeding. Seems so tired when we're breathing. Come a little dinosaur, creeping
kind of reminds me of some of like the Mollusk songs that just have that like epicness to them.
Yeah, dude, totally. The epicness.
Yeah.
Like a Buckingham Green follow-up.
Right. The Grove is just everyone,
Yeah.
screaming, that sort of thing.
There's absolutely a carryover from the Mollusk to White Pepper. Absolutely. And they're building on that, but you have songs that have sort of in the back burner and like, that are evolved and have been written in the past and sort of waiting for the right day to come out. So clearly they're evolving into the White Pepper, and there's going to be these touches of the Mollusk and whatnot. That takes us to Pandy Fackler, which is another, I mentioned it's another big Glenn song. But this one's interesting, dude, because you kind of get a little bit of insight into some of Ween's songwriting with this. Diener has said that sometimes it's you sort of invent a character, or Diener was like, you invent a character and then you can kind of be inspired to like tell their story, and it's like freeing because you just invent a character. And it's funny, in that C4 interview, Diener says that like that's Bob Dylan damage.
You hear somebody say something, it might inspire a song or whatever, Yeah, we do have a lot of characters in our tunes.
I think that's Bob Dylan damage. He always had a lot of characters in his songs, and there's.
Yeah, right.
It's a really cool.
He is the champion of that.
Yeah, and it's a very inspirational thing. You think of a character and you can really write something about him or her. It's cool.
A lot of times, songs are best when you come up with the title first, because if you come up with the title, then as you write the lyrics and the music, it's all kind of going towards the central theme. When you choose your sounds and everything, you can really like ram an idea home.
Because Dylan always has all these characters, dude. And you know what's crazy? Like, I was thinking about that. Like, Ween, the Beatles, and Bob Dylan are three, like, bands, like, whatever, that you could make, like, a poster. And the poster could have, like, it's sort of like, hey, find all the songs in the poster.
Yeah.
and you'd have, like, and you'd have, like, Pandy Fackler there, like, behind, like, the bleachers, like, and it's it's so cool. And I know that, reviews have said that, she's the mentally disabled, I guess would be the nicer way of putting what some people have said 20 years ago. But
Right.
I don't know if I pick up that exactly. I suppose that's the case. I know Diener has said it's about a woman who tries really hard to get things done but can't quite get it done. But she just tries real hard.
Yeah.
And so I suppose, it's funny. And this song's great because, White Pepper is sometimes gets accused of not being too brown. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But I think this is an example where they're digging back into that and having fun and being ribald and kind of ridiculous. So I think it's a great throwback. I think this song and also Bananas and Blow a little bit earlier. Bananas and Blow is a little more tame. Pandy Fackler, is a little bit more ribald. But they're both stand out in the album as like these like songs that sort of a little bit different than what's around them. So that's kind of cool. And Pandy Fackler is jammed out live, and Glenn rocks it live. So that's the cool one. Pandy Fackler, it sort of is a live song that's, you forget about it, but then you realize, man, they really jammed that out.
Yeah, it's really the only one from White Pepper that really gets like a long jam when it comes to the live show. I mean, pretty much everything else from White Pepper, as amazing as they might be when the band plays them live, they're pretty standard. They're pretty standard like renditions. We talked about like the epicness of like the Grove or whatever. So they're amazing, and I'm not complaining at all, but it's like Pandy Fackler is really the only one that they've turned into like that vehicle to be like 10 minutes long. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
and just jam that shit out. Just let Glenn fucking go, you know?
Totally. Yeah, his fingerprints are all over this album. And then the album kind of ends, like the trio at the end, it kind of throws you off guard. You don't see a lot of songs like this from Ween, but they're out there, absolutely. There's plenty of them, to be honest, but they often get overshadowed. But just these beautiful, like Stay Forever is just a beautiful, like, love ballad, you know? And I feel like, to me, that's like probably the most beautiful love song that Ween has written, or one of them.
Oh my God, it's definitely up there, no question.
It's great, man. I mean, I sing that a cappella to my wife all the time. I ain't afraid to tell you. You know? And so it's just freaking cool, and it's just really evidence of their lyrical chops, the songwriting chops, and they just have this great ability to know when it's like, all right, let's strip this down and make it like, you know, simplified, like kind of let's chill it down. Like everything doesn't have to be, you know, 5 minutes of like weird noises. You know what I mean? Like it's cool. Falling Out. Always, to me, always made me feel like had a Beatles vibe to me, like Run Like Hell, Run Like Hell's a Pink Floyd. I'm sorry, Run for Your Life, on Rubber Soul. I don't know. I always felt like echoes of that, man. Like both in how the songs fall, how the song is sort of how they play the song, but also just the sort of the content of this like negative thing, like a falling out, like, you know, Run for Your Life. And you think of the Beatles anyway as all these lovey-dovey songs. You obviously don't think of Ween that way. But nevertheless, I always got a Beatles vibe on that.
It's a great comparison, and it really is like both songs, not only are they sort of more like the upbeat side, but both songs have that cut right to the quick, cut right to the chase. Neither one sort of like fuck around with what they're trying to say. You know what I mean?
Totally.
So, and they're both very smart tunes. You know what I mean? It's just, I'm trying to get this point across in this song. It's not something that I like talking about. It's not very pretty or anything like that, but it's important, and boom, done. Cut right to the quick.
It really Falling Out reads to me like a poem, and it's about, I think it's about two relationships, but I don't want to get all into the details about what each song's about necessarily, but it's written to me, it feels like a poem. And I love it because it tells a story, but it also sort of has a message, or has like a, you know, deeper meanings. And I would say especially true with the end with She's Your Baby. I think a million layers of crust and deposit, blanket the seasons, bury the reasons. You told her that this was for good. You know, it's just, man, it's kind of sad.
Amazing song, man. Amazing song.
Yeah. Yeah, dude, I mean, it's just really cool, and it's hard to unpack, so I'm not going to sit here and tell you exactly what you're supposed to get out of it, and what it all means. But Down Where the Devils Are Dying with Laughter, you know, it's like there's just some really great lines and just these interesting images that you're trying to unpack, and like what it's really, it's kind of a little bit psychedelic. It's not like musically psychedelic, lyrically psychedelic in a way, I guess, and sort of obtuse, like not readily unpacked, you know. And so it's neat that the album ends on this a little bit of a cryptic note for me, dude. Like, this song's a little bit cryptic to me.
Yeah, I can feel that, absolutely. Yeah.
But another sort of love ballad, like a slower bedtime song a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Just in case we don't get back there, we kind of skipped over Stroker Ace, which I could see why. But that's sort of like
I mean, I sort of did.
It's okay. It's like the ribald, one that jumps out, from this album. But one of the things, and I just picked up on this myself, going back and because obviously I've been listening to this album lately, kind of getting prepared for the podcast and refreshing my memory and stuff. And you had mentioned North Pappy Flappy, which is brought up during Stroker Ace, and
yes,
that is
So thank you for bringing that back up.
I can only think of that as being the second time where a Ween song title is referenced in another Ween song. So basically, like Stroker Ace, he mentions North Pappy Flappy, which is a real kind of obscure thing that's old school, winds up on those like B-sides and stuff that you got to dig for.
We talk about that in one of our earlier episodes.
The Toronto show that we went to.
Yeah, so if you want to check out one of our earlier episodes, Toronto, the Warehouse, that was, I think, 1999, so that was pretty wild. But anyway.
Yeah, they play North Pappy Flappy. But the only other one that I can come up with, and I'm sure there's more, but Baby Bitch, because he mentions the song Birthday Boy. So the actual song title, Birthday Boy, is in Baby Bitch. And same thing with Stroker Ace.
Nice. Deep cuts.
North Pappy Flappy.
Deep cuts.
Yeah. So I just picked up on that myself within the last couple of days of going back and listening to White Pepper.
But I'll tell you what, like Stroker Ace is, I would say, we're getting to the point here where we're going to start talking about the album in general anyway. And one of the claims that we make is that there's not really any throwaway songs on this album. And I would say if there is one, in my mind, all apologies, it would be Stroker Ace. I'm not complaining, but I kind of always felt like it's sort of like it's like Ween trying hard to be Ween, and it's really a lot like Johnny on the Spot, except they don't jam it out live. And I don't know, I always felt like that way. I'm not as into this sort of like speed metal side of Ween as much. I mean, I'll jam out to it live, dude, and put the devil horns up and freaking bow down to the Boognish god, demon god, but just not as into it.
Yeah, it's definitely a Diener track, and it's kind of like a it would fit into like a Moist Boys like album. You know what I mean? It's not saying anything positive or negative about it. It's definitely like one of those Diener like ribald like just fucking get down to the rock kind of songs. And
I can just imagine like Diener watching like Burt Reynolds being like Stroker Ace, and it's like character freaking. Another thing that Diener said in the C4 interview is that he, sometimes you come up with a song title and then you sort of that helps everything kind of go towards the theme because you have the title and you're all working everything toward that title. And you got to think about, and then I think, and it's interesting learning that some songwriting, like getting inside the head of Diener, because then you see a song like this and you think, how did this come about, right?
Yeah.
Probably just popped in his head.
Well, and I know that he mentions Dick Trickle, who was a race car driver, and for I don't know if that's his official like nickname, Stroker Ace, or not, but for years and years and years, my dad had a Dick Trickle shirt, and every time he wore it, I would just be like, Stroker Ace! That's just a little side ditty there for you.
Yeah, it's awesome, dude. Yeah, I remember that shirt. Good shout out to your dad, to Pops.
So just like one of those things where I don't know if that was his like actual nickname, and Diener found out about that. It's just like, oh, Stroker Ace, like, yeah. Who knows how it actually came about.
Oh yeah, totally. I'm just spitballing at this point. I'm not exactly sure, but just it's just fun thinking through the thinking process, and as you learn, bits and pieces of how they go through and work through songs. It's kind of cool to think about that. But yeah, dude, so I'll kind of let you kind of roll a little bit. Tell me about the album, man. Like that's the songs, like, you know, kind of dive through the songs, but certainly as a whole, let's talk about the album as a whole.
Well, you know, when we went back and we did sort of our favorite album podcast, so then there's another plug for our own show. I don't mean to do that, but one of the things I had brought up,
dude, plug our own show all night long, you know.
So one of the things that I had mentioned during that conversation was, you know, the country album and the Mollusk are the ones that come before this, and they have a very good flow to them because they're sort of like theme albums, or they're sort of concept albums, if you will. Every song is great and it just flows. It's the kind of thing where you can just start it, listen to the whole thing, and it has like a rhythm. It has a nice, you know, sort of thing that fits as one piece of art, the entire album. So I'm not saying it's a criticism of White Pepper per se, but I always kind of felt like it has this chunk, which is great, this chunk, which is great, and this chunk, which is great. And it doesn't necessarily have the same kind of like flow, okay? Again, great songs, and every song on White Pepper is great. There's nothing really that's like throwaway. You could argue, you know, maybe Stroker Ace, but, you know, like everything about it is quality. One of the things that we were going to talk, I'm sure we'll get to, is, you know, it's the most like high fidelity Ween album, especially up to that point. It sounds great.
Yes, the production value, just, you know, they have backup singers, they got like additional musicians, they're like, everything's like pristine quality, like very minimum amount of that grunge factor that early Ween is so well known for.
Yes. So it's sort of like the first section is exactly where I'm at, Flutes of the Chi, Even If You Don't, and Bananas and Blow. It all is sort of like what I would refer to as like harmony songs. I know that's kind of like it doesn't really say a whole lot, but it's like fun, upbeat, you know, pretty. They all have a good sort of like harmony, okay? Then you got Stroker Ace, and that sort of like cuts it apart. That's sort of like the divider of like, okay, you got those four, now Stroker Ace sort of like sits by itself, and that puts you in like a different frame of mind altogether, okay? That doesn't really like attach itself to like anything else on the record. Okay, Then you got the second section, which is Ice Castles, Back to Basin, and The Grove. Okay, now I already mentioned David Lynch. It's kind of like the dark section, like the slow, all of a sudden you're having like a nightmare, or like you're feeling like uneasy, you know, that kind of thing. Okay, it's the dark, you know, deep kind of nighttime kind of feel. Okay, then you got Pandy Fackler. Again, that sort of like divides it. That sort of like stands on its own. Okay, again, doesn't really attach itself to anything. Not saying it's a bad song. It just doesn't like fit being next to those tracks that it's next to. You know what I mean? So then you have the rest of the album: Stay Forever, Falling Out, She's Your Baby. Okay, heavy, deep, introspective. Okay, songs that make you think, okay? A lot of lyrics that make you, like, feel a certain way or another about your life or about your relationships or, you know, that kind of thing. I also, and again, this just hit me the other day listening to it, it's sort of like staying up all night. You know, you start off and you're feeling good about it, and you're like, you know, you're like giddy, and it's like, yeah, we're gonna do this, and it's fun, and you're feeling good. Then you start getting tired, you know what I mean? And then you start, you know, maybe this wasn't such a good idea. You know, and then you got that like section of the album, Ice Castles, Back to Basin, The Grove.
Yeah,
you know
dude.
What I mean?
And then you get Pandy Fackler, and it's like that's when you shake the sillies out, you know? Cause it's
right. That's when you start getting like, you get like goofy. You start hitting
it's like
that
the change
wall.
Of pace. You know, you got to do something to get out of that funk, that gothic funk.
You start getting like crazy about it. You start, you know, feeling, you know, goofy, you know, da. Then, you know, you start thinking. Then you start wondering about things in your own life and your relationships with people and you know, again, introspective, you know, that kind of thing. That's the last part of the album. Again, Stay Forever, Falling Out, She's Your Baby. Things about you and your relationships with other people. You know, that sort of thing. That's the way I always sort of felt about it. It has a few different like sections to it. Not a criticism, and I love every one of those songs, but it may not have the same sort of like flow as it does of being like this amazing chunk, and this amazing chunk. So that's my main, like, you know.
I would say that in the sense, I would say earlier Ween albums don't really have a flow. I would say albums right before this one kind of have the flow, because you're dealing with these like concept albums and whatnot.
Right.
And I think people weren't sure what to make of White Pepper. It's not a concept album, but yeah, dude, I think I do see how it is interesting how you've laid it out, and I think it makes some sense, because it isn't. I mean, like it isn't just like a cohesive album, which I think is a great departure from what they had done 2 times before that, because it's almost like, the Mollusk, we all know, wasn't appreciated in its own time. And we all know Golden Country Greats is like, a lot of people sadly look at it as a stain on Ween. So you kind of look at this time period, and if you're the more hardcore Ween head, this is I guess some people feel like it's a little bit of a dark time period. And so that's sort of something to kind of talk about. I know, reading some reviews, it's been said that, when White Pepper came out, that some of the hardcore old school fans kind of thought it was selling out, it's like this finely produced album, very nice mainstream appeal, and there's a lot to say about that, and that, oh man, they're selling out. And I think, so first off, I want to say I respect every Ween head's opinion. We're not super old school fans. I mean, we go back to, we started listening to them after Chocolate and Cheese was released, so that time period. So we're not super old school, compared to like the real old school heads that go back to like God, Ween, Satan and shit.
Yeah.
So we have a different perspective on that. And I would just say that the one thing that I look at that and say, you know what, dude, every Ween album is different.
Yeah.
And that's a hallmark. That's an awesome thing. And it reminds me of the Beatles in a way, which is something else I want to talk about. But every Ween album is different. And the way that White Pepper is different is that this is when the 5-piece band went into the fucking studio and said, we are going to polish this up, and we are going to freaking spit shine this and put it out there, man. And that's the theme of this. That is the theme. It's an eclectic group of songs, a lot of variety in the musical genres and the styles that are played. And as you mentioned, it's not all cohesive necessarily, right? And I guess that's the theme to me. And it's like, there's nothing wrong with that. I think you have a band evolving from 2 guys to a 5-piece band and wanting to show all the facets of them. And so I thought that was cool. I think Diener says, again, I'm referencing the C4 interview, so thank you to those people. But, Diener comments at the end of that interview, dude, he says, I don't think we've come this far just to make fun of music, just to destroy music. He's like, we just were trying to play music, play good music. I think he's already defending himself through this tour. And it's like, dude, I mean, this is another facet of Ween.
So a couple of things, like, you mentioned the whole, like, sellout, topic. And it is funny to me because, I'm a big punk rock guy. And, trust me, I've used the term sellout, about a lot of bands over the years and whatnot. But there's a couple of different thoughts that I have about that. First of all, and I don't mean to be too harsh on, the critics or anything like that, but I feel like there's 2 reasons why someone would say, this album would be like Ween, like, selling out. Basically, it would be, first of all, a music critic wants to make themselves sound smart, and, every band has to have the point where they quote unquote sold out, right? It's like, come on. Like with Ween, it's like they've been, obviously by this time, especially, they've been trying to get better and better and better. And they've succeeded at it, okay? So it's kind of like, this does not strike me as like a sellout album at all. The other thing, the other reason I would say that someone might say that about this album is it doesn't really have like the humor. And the people who are just looking for like those songs to be like a joke, okay, so Pandy Fackler has some, sense of humor to it, and Stroker Ace and
Bananas
and Blow. Bananas and Blow is kind of that one token, like, the first time you hear that, it's like, but
famously people have said White Pepper, the word fuck is not in the album. Like, that's kind of like the point. Like, that's sort of like a way to sum it up, right? To the hardcore fan.
Right. It's like they haven't dropped the sense of humor completely, but it's not really like prevalent on this album at all. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So if you know only a little bit about Ween and you're listening to White Pepper, it's like, oh, where's the goofy, stupid, tracks? It's like, no, there are no stupid, goofy tracks, okay? It's just all great. You know what I mean?
Yeah, dude. And Diener's very explicit about that. He's like, we're trying to make good music. That's totally a commentary on that, dude. This is very interesting, dude. So he has Matt and Trey come in. They help out with the video. That is so informative because Diener actually says he's like, he's got a lot of respect for Matt and Trey because they're like in the mainstream but they're subversive. You know, like South Park is huge. Matt and Trey are huge.
Right.
And so like Ween looks up to them as like, man, they're like us, except somehow they're in the mainstream. And so it really is this moment of like, how can we like bridge that gap without losing our identity? And here's two guys that have done that.
Right. You know, that's another good point in terms of if you're just looking at like, oh, you mean the South Park guys? So like anybody that like they're associated with, it must be like a joke. You know, it's like, no. You know, it's like, don't be so, you know, short-sighted. You know what I mean? Like, just because it's, you know, them working together doesn't mean that it's a comedy act. You know what I mean? So that might be a little bit of that stigma sort of rearing its ugly head.
People also have a tendency not to take humor seriously, and it's like, I think that's a mistake.
Absolutely. It's like humor is just a part of life. And, you know, if you're Aaron especially, that's just part of who he is. And if it comes across as being humorous, it's because he has a great sense of humor, obviously. You know, so that just shows up in his writing.
Totally. And yeah, dude, I look at this album, it's like, there's definitely a lot of it's like a softer side of Ween, and there ain't nothing wrong with that. You see glimpses of that throughout, like Birthday Boy. Come on, that goes back to God, Ween, Satan. So you get glimpses of that all around. You just see it in higher proportions here, right? So I think that that hopefully in hindsight some people can be a little more kinder to White Pepper, dude. I don't remember exactly where I put it because we didn't rank them exactly, but when we went through and we're talking about our favorite albums of all time, I'm pretty sure White Pepper comes in there like kind of in the middle near the top, like 4th or 5th, I think. Like I like White Pepper, dude. Like I love it. I think it's on the better end of their albums. Like, you know, it's definitely not one of the best albums of all time, in my opinion, but it's definitely not one of the worst. And, you know, that's something else that I've heard that I couldn't verify, and maybe someone out there can speak to it, but I've heard a lot of people say that, you know, a lot of fans put this near the bottom of their list. And so maybe I'm kooky crazy, Shane. Maybe I'm a kooky crazy guy. But I think I just think it's tight. I just think there's just like not really much to throw away, and it's just like a lot of good songs. And if I'm being honest, which I am, right? Then there's a few songs on here that are some of my fucking favorite songs of Ween. Like, they're definitely there, and yet there aren't any really on here that are like at the way bottom. You know, I've mentioned Stroker Ace, okay, so maybe that one is, but none of the other ones are near the bottom. And I would say if I was like looking at God, Ween, Satan or The Pod, there's probably a whole bunch of songs on there that, sorry to say, if I was ranking Ween songs from 1 to 300 or however many there are, a lot of the earlier ones probably would be near the bottom because they're like weird songs with sounds and things and whatever, you know. It's like, and that's cool and that's a part of Ween and that's awesome, but this is a part of Ween too.
Well, it's hard when you're like ranking the albums because, you know, you can't help but compare them to each other. And one of the things that we just said is, you know, every Ween album is completely unique and it's completely different in and of itself. So it's hard when you're, you know, ranking your favorite Ween albums because you sort of like have no choice but to like compare them to each other. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that kind of like hurts, you know, White Pepper because you're comparing it to, you know, like the Mollusk or Chocolate and Cheese or something like that. A couple of other thoughts that I have though as like a whole thing. First of all, from our own personal experience, and I know I had mentioned this on our album review episode as well, but at the time, you know, we mentioned again during this episode that we were seeing a lot of Ween shows, and like, you know, we had seen a lot of these songs played live. We had heard a lot of these songs played live before the album came out. So I can't help but have that sort of like hinder my like take on it because it wasn't the kind of thing where like you have no knowledge of this record and then all of a sudden it's just dropped on you and it's just everything is wow, you know, all brand new. You know what I mean? It's sort of like it was like half and half. It was sort of half songs I had never heard before and half songs I'm like, oh, okay, that song. Like, you know, that's how it sounds when they got into the studio and actually recorded it for real. But it's, I already know it. I already know all the words. You know what I mean? Because I was just like inhaling those live shows over and over and over at that point. Via the bootlegs and everything else. The other thing is, it's again, it doesn't have the obvious like concept album sort of stamp to it like the Country Record or the Mollusk. It's White Pepper. What does White Pepper really mean? Well, we don't really know. It's a lot like Pure Guava. Or Chocolate and Cheese. It's just a collection of tracks. I'm not saying that in a diminishing way at all, but there again, you reference the Beatles. It's like, the White Album. What is it? It's a collection of songs. Okay. How it flows together is sort of like, secondary. It's just a collection of great songs. It's ominous. White Pepper. What does White Pepper mean? You know what I mean? It doesn't mean anything. It's just a collection of great music.
Yeah, dude. And that brings up, like, I know, people out there you're reading, and I know people have said it, that, White Pepper might mean White Album plus Sgt. Pepper's. Like, it's kind of like this, like, here we are, we're going to put it all together, and the Beatles were the greatest pop band, and now Ween's going to do this, like, we're audacious or something. And unless someone out there can correct me, I'm going to say I'm pretty sure that the band has never said that that's the case, that's just like a fan theory. And, that's cool and all, because I've always had like this, and even though it might not be true, that's fine. Like, I don't need it to be true, but it's a neat idea because I've always looked at the Beatles and Ween sort of with a parallel sense of like kind of looking through they're like, okay, they both put out a lot of albums of high quality over a certain amount of time. You can
Absolutely.
sort of see like a progression, from like album to album, like, their high period, it's like, oh, Chocolate and Cheese is like Revolver or something like that, and the Mollusk is like Sgt. Pepper's or something. And it's funny, I wouldn't say that White Pepper is White Album. I would say Quebec is the White Album. But
okay.
But I just think it's neat, just in my own, now I'm blabbing a little bit, but I just think it's neat because I've always made these connections with the Beatles, with Ween. And so on this album, you do, like, I Flutes of the Chi, Falling Out, Pandy Fackler, kind of like that George Martin piano driven, Paul McCartney on the piano. Kind of like, they're a little bit Beatles-esque. It's there, and I think the footprint's there. I mean, the Beatles are an influence on so many bands. It's not a surprise that Ween is influenced by the Beatles.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you could say that about both of those albums, the White Album and Sgt. Pepper, even though Sgt. Pepper has that sort of like opening and closing of, okay, the Sgt. Pepper, but, you go back to basically any interview from the Beatles about Sgt. Pepper, and they talk about, no, it's us as like another band, and we can do any genre that we want, and that's one of the things about Sgt. Pepper is it's here, it's there, it's everywhere, you know what I mean? And it's a bunch of different genres all thrown together, and that's
the Beatles, just like Ween, they're like all about genre bending.
Yeah, just like Ween and White Pepper, it's just like we'll be any genre that we want. It doesn't have, again, it's like ominous, if that's a good word. It doesn't reference like anything. It's just them doing all the types of music that they want to do. So I think it's a great analogy. And again, I agree with you. I don't know if there's any like interviews or anything where they specifically said, yeah, that's what the title is in reference to, or if it's just something that like, you think about it, it's like, oh, hey, White Pepper, like the Beatles, right? Okay. It's just a fun little like ditty, but great album. At the end of the day, it's a great album.
Yeah, dude. I would say, I don't want to spend 30 more minutes just repeating myself. But like, yeah, dude, I think I put this album in the top half of Ween albums. There's a lot of Ween albums. I put it in the top half for sure. I just think there's a lot of craft that's gone into these songs. There's definitely some of these songs that are some of my favorite songs of all time for Ween and all bands. And I just love the craft. And I also love Glenn. Like, I have like a pianist, keyboardist crush on Glenn. So... it's just awesome. And so
don't we all? I mean,
yeah, dude. And so just to feel his print on these songs, and then seeing the songs live, and his print is even larger. It's just really cool to see the 5-piece band all working together to create the product. And it's like, you really feel like everything's working on all cylinders now. And more so than ever before, Ween is also it's like a live band now too. So yeah, you have this album here, and people complain maybe it's a little short. There's not a lot of throwaway, so it's a little short, but go see it live. Go see it live, like that's what they are now. So go see the 5-piece band Ween as a live act, because that's really where they're flourishing.
Yeah, I mean, like if you were going to compare it to one of the older albums, you could say, okay, well maybe it's a little short compared to like, the Pod or Pure Guava or something like that, but there's nothing really on it that's like skippable. So that's like your trade-off. There isn't really anything on White Pepper that I could say like, I'm just going to skip past that one. It's like, no, I'm going to listen to the whole thing. You know what I mean? The other thing, I'm pretty sure I had mentioned this on on our album review episode, but one of the other things that we bring up a lot, actually, and it's easy to when you're talking about a band like Ween, is it's like, how would you introduce their music to someone who doesn't know them? And I still to this day think White Pepper is the most accessible to like someone to be like, oh, okay, well, what album should I start with? It's like, in my opinion, I'm going to go with it every time, White Pepper.
Yeah, dude. No, it's roundly considered their most accessible album, and it is, and it's not, the F word's not in it, right? It's a little more accessible, it's a little less, offensive, and that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, it's not just because it doesn't have, that ribald, like, dirtiness or whatever. It's just because it's just great, and it is accessible. It's not something that would scare somebody away. There's nothing on it that's too far out there that someone would listen to and be like, what the fuck is this? Maybe like Ice Castles or one of those sort of like darker songs.
Well, you've got the bridge songs, right? Like Panty Fackler and Bananas and Blow that are guaranteed to make your like grandmother cringe. But, it's funny. I want to share an anecdote, Bananas and Blow, because it stood out to me because it's like, well, that one is a little bit risque, right? Bananas and Blow. And
sure.
And Amy and I were visiting Philadelphia last year, and she was having a drink at a bar. And it was for the Ween show. It was for the Ween weekend, right?
Totally. The Philly Met.
The Philly Met show. And so we were, telling the bartenders, like, yeah, we're here for a Ween show. And she's like, oh, Ween, is that the band with that song? Blowjobs and Bananas.
Nice.
So I was like, well, that's not that's not the title of the song.
Nice.
But that was awesome that it's like, but like, that's what you remember. That's how she thinks of the song. So it's funny.
It's one of those.
But nevertheless, even with Bananas and Blow, even with Panty Fackler, I would still say this is the most accessible. And they are covering risky topics. Risque topics, but hey, man, even grandma needs to have her mind blown from time to time.
Shake the dust off, come on, Hey, it's harmless. Come on, it's harmless.
Yeah,
a little harmless fun, come on. So I guess that's our White Pepper conversation.
Yeah, dude. I think we covered all the bases. It's cool, man. Ween just shows you a new side of them every time. It actually made me think of the Argus, and all the many eyes, and like all the many facets of Ween. It's like a spider with all the eyes and everything reflects off them. It's like, and this is just another reflection. And so I think it's great.
Yeah,
so check out White Pepper, guys.
20th
20th anniversary. Relive it, man. And let us know what you think. If you have something to add to what we talked about, then by all means check in with us. Let us know. I'm sure we didn't cover everything. I'm sure there's other details out there. And if we got anything a little bit off, by all means correct us.
Yeah, hit us up on Facebook, on Twitter, Patreon. Again, as we had mentioned, it's patreon.com/Weencast podcast. And yeah, we want to hear your Ween stories. We want to hear about the first time you heard White Pepper. You know what I mean? Like, did somebody recommend it to you? That would be a good question I'd like to throw out there to anybody. Yeah, did somebody recommend that album to you as a first album to listen to for Ween?
Yeah, totally. And because, dude, there's a lot of people at this time there's a lot of Ween fans coming into the fold around 2000. A lot of people, this could have been their first album. So yeah, man, we want to hear from you. Was it your first album? Did someone introduce Ween to you with this album? Like, tell us your stories.
Yeah, we'd love to hear from anybody. So if there's anything else that we missed, please hook us up. But otherwise...
Yeah, thanks for listening, everybody. Another Weencast podcast for you. Hope you enjoy. Hope you have enjoyed. If not, it is what it is, I guess.
Thank you so much, everybody. Hope to hear from everyone soon. Thanks.
All right. Peace out.
Yeah.
Hi, boys. Nice to see you. Thank you very much. Look, kids, it's Ween. Thanks for being here. Great song. Great CD. Thank you. Nice to meet you. Thanks for coming. Ween. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm John, an amateur musician and dad.
And I'm Harrison, his younger brother and a recovering know-it-all.
And we host a podcast called Play Disc.
John is open-minded and well-versed in music theory and composition.
And Harrison is extremely online and reflexively contrarian.
Hey, I'm not reflexively contrarian. Who wrote this copy?
Every other Tuesday, we host a discussion on a different full album, showcasing our contrasting energies.
And our idiosyncrasies, like John tying everything back to the Beatles.
Or Harrison insisting everything is a ska song.
Play Disc is available anywhere you get podcasts from.
New episodes every other Tuesday. Catch you on the B-side.